One of the other problems of politics is that there must always be problems and solutions. It was once said of a liberal politician, he has more solutions than there are problems. Let me give you an example of how problems can be created statistically and otherwise. One of the Congressional Budget Office came out with some statistics a few years ago showing that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, or were during the Reagan administration, presumably not in this new enlightened era. Now, again, being skeptical, I sent away for the original statistics. It really produces absolute cynicism when you read enough of these government reports. One of the ways that the poor were getting poorer was that they left out of these statistics more than $150 billion in government transfers. Those weren't counted. And as for the rich, they counted as capital gains things that most people would not think of as capital gains. For example, if you invest $10,000 and you hold the investment while the price level doubles, and then you cash it in. Now, if you get less than $20,000, you have lost money in real terms. Not as far as the government's concerned. Let's suppose you get $15,000 back with the price level doubled. As far as the Congressional Budget Office is concerned, you've made $5,000 in capital gains. And if you want to correct for inflation, you divide the $5,000 by 2, and so you've made $2,500 in capital gains. So you can be one of the rich who's getting richer all the while you're heading toward bankruptcy court. And this produced what I think is one of the fundamental principles of statistics, which is that A always exceeds B if you leave out enough of A and exaggerate B. One of the reasons that the people in the upper income bracket receive such a high percentage of the total national income is that there are more people. That is, if you look at the top 20% of families and income and look at the bottom 20%, you'll discover that there are 28% more people in the top 20% than in the bottom 20%. And since it is people who earn money, this is one of the reasons the others are in the top brackets. There have been a number of studies done. Well, there's a more fundamental problem with the data than this. Years ago, someone told about a man in New York who had heard that someone was hit by a car in Manhattan once every 20 minutes. And his response was, he must get awfully tired of that. Exactly the same reasoning can be found in these statistics that are given out, because they assume that these are the same people all the time. There have been several studies done, and fortunately they've been done by people who are left-wing intellectuals at the University of Michigan and conservative Republicans in Washington, and they all give the same answer, which is that in the course of less than a decade, most Americans move out of whatever income bracket they're in. For example, if you looked at the bottom 20% as of 1979 of income taxpayers, by 1988, 85% of those people were no longer in the bottom. In fact, a slightly higher percentage were in the top 20% by 1988 than remained in the bottom 20%. And so we're talking about a changing mixture of people over time rather than the same folks. In fact, many of the people in the bottom 20% are the children of the people in the top 20%. And finally, let me look at another crisis that we hear of, hunger statistics. Now, a political advocacy group computed a few years ago how many Americans were hungry. Now, when you think about it, how would you find out how many people are hungry? It takes a long time to go through a country of 240 million people and ask everybody, are you hungry? Naturally, they had to speed this up. So they got a census computer tape. And they figured out the eligibility for food stamps, and they ran the tape through to find out how many people are eligible for food stamps. Then they found out how many people actually get food stamps. They subtracted one from the other, and the difference were hungry. Using this method, someone decided to find out what was the hungriest county in the United States. It turned out to be a farming and ranching community where the employees and the employers ate what they grew. Now, because the employees were being paid partly in room and board, their cash payments were lower than they would have been otherwise. And so in the county, there were a certain number of people who were below the level where they were eligible for food, even though they were eating their own steaks and vegetables. And I think there was only one person in the entire county who actually was on food stamps. All the others were hungry. There are more of these things, but I'm going to cut it short to have some time for questions and answers. With hunger, as with income, when you look at actual individual flesh and blood people, you get a radically different answer than if you look at the gross statistics. So the Center for Disease Control and the U.S. Department of Agriculture have actually looked at flesh and blood people. They have taken blood samples. They've done other studies of them. They cannot find any greater likelihood of poor children being clinically underweight than other children. Blood samples show no evidence of any protein or vitamin deficiencies varying from one income bracket to another. The only difference they can find is that low-income women have a slightly greater tendency to be obese, presumably from hunger. The media play a tremendous role in all this because you can always find someone who is highly atypical, put him on the tube, interview him, and represent his case as if it's typical of the whole country. And there's a great deal of that going on. There are not only ideological reasons for doing this, there are financial reasons. Because obviously the more crises there are, the more reason there is to buy newspapers and watch television. And so you find many, many crises in these places. I've suggested a couple of times, and like most suggestions by economists, it was ignored, that the networks could easily afford to have a department of professional statisticians who would examine all these hysterical statistics that are thrown around by various groups that would have an axe to grind. Of course, that would mean there'd be more accuracy on the television tube, but it also means there'll be lower ratings. And so this is apparently not the kind of trade-off that they're looking for. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We have a couple of cordless microphones that will be circulating around. If any of you would like to ask Dr. Sowell a question, please raise your hand and we'll try to get a mic to you. Please speak into the mic so we can all hear.
I'd be interested in your opinion of Rush Limbaugh.
I'm a Rush Limbaugh fan. I was delighted to hear that my friend Walter Williams was substituted for Rush recently. I didn't hear the broadcast, but I'm going to send away for the tape. I assume that they put on Walter for those who thought that Rush was too moderate. No, it's incredible, the demonization of this man in the media. How many of you know that the biggest bestseller in history of any nonfiction book was written by Rush Limbaugh? This book was on the New York Times bestseller list for dozens of weeks before the New York Times ever reviewed it. And the review was buried in the back of the section. One of the really scary things is the extent to which people are being demonized for political differences. I think the prime example is Clarence Thomas. It's simply not enough for people to say they disagree with his political opinions or with his judicial philosophy. They must picture this man as a demon. Now, I've known Clarence Thomas since 1979, one of the hardest people in the world to demonize. I get worked up when I even think about it. I hope everyone has read David Brock's book called The Real Anita Hill. The gist of it is that before this book was written, it was her word against his. But after this book was written, it's her word against a whole army of people who contradict what she said on subject after subject after subject. One of the fascinating things, which seems to me so characteristic of Clarence, was that during this early period when he was at the Department of Education, he would drop Anita Hill off when he was passing her place. And one evening she invites him in, and this is from people who were there who knew both of them at the same time, to whom she complained that he paid no attention to her. Very different from her later complaints. And one of the stories that she told to her fellow employees was that she invited him in, offered him a glass of wine, which he declined, and that he sat there talking about Ronald Reagan and his grandfather, which again sounds very typical, but somewhat different from the story that's being told in the media. In any event, I got off onto a tangent.
First of all, congratulations on your book, Exposing the American Education System. My question is education related. How do you respond to the anti-choice and anti-voucher educators who say that the American education system has been the great equalizer in our democracy, and to allow vouchers to be used in private schools would destroy the great equalizer?
It's fascinating because what they're saying is that if everyone has an opportunity to go to private schools, that's unequal. But if only those with their own money have that right, then it's equal. It's fascinating reasoning. No, they're having a tremendous campaign in California to say how horrible the voucher schools will be, how wonderful the public schools are. And what strikes me is that even if you were to grant that for the sake of argument, why then would you expect parents to be leaving these wonderful public schools to go to these horrible voucher schools? Unfortunately, I think they have a chance of winning out there. That is the public school people, partly because it's an off-year election. And so many of the voters will simply not turn out. Well, every member of the National Education Association will certainly turn out and vote at least once.
Dr. Sowell, I am chairman of Florida's Republican Party, and I have used, I didn't realize we were in such disregard here this evening. I have used your conflict of visions as an analysis between the difference in the Florida Democrat and Republican Party. And I'm never sure I have quite captured that. Your book was so intellectually challenging that it left me kind of in the doldrums from time to time. Would you address that for me in a way that I might re-present that in a way that might be more fashionable than I have done so already?
Well, since I know absolutely nothing about the Florida parties of the Democrats or the Republicans, I'm not sure how I could do that. But well, yeah. One of the things that happens is people, some gatherings, they introduce me and say how I came out of Harlem and went on to professional careers, if that was something extraordinary. And a few years ago, a black lawyer in Harlem wrote to me, from Harlem, I don't think he was in Harlem anymore, saying that